My Redeemer lives. And we're just going to cover quickly between chapters 18 and chapters 19 of Job. So beginning, or looking at verse 25 of 19. Maybe you may recognize it. It's from George Handel's Messiah. For I know that my Redeemer lives, and at the last he will stand upon the earth. And after my skin has been thus destroyed, yet in my flesh I shall see God, whom I shall see for myself, and my eyes shall behold, and not another. My heart faints within me. Back in chapter 9 and the 33rd verse, we had picked up that there is no arbiter between us who might lay his hand on both, meaning him, Job, and God. In chapter 16, verses 18 through 21, beginning with 18, it says, "It's cover not my blood, and let my cry find no resting place." So he's calling for justice. He wants this case to be heard. Even if he should die, he wants his case to continue. In 19, "Even now, behold, my witness is in heaven, and he who testifies for me is on high. My friends scorn me. My eye pours out tears to God, that he would argue the case of a man with God, as a son of man does with his neighbor." So he wants an arbiter. Back in chapter 9, an advocate, a lawyer. In 16, he wants a witness. And now in chapter 19, you have a redeemer. You have an arbiter, a witness, and a redeemer. So Job is pleading his case with God. I mean, he's lost everything. He's lost his wealth. He lost his 10 children. And now his health. He's dying. And he's just about nothing but skin and bones, it seems. He's arguing his case before God, saying that he is innocent. I did not do anything. I'm in the right. So he says that there is no justice. How is God just to do this? He wants God to say something, to give him an answer. But God has not said one single word to him. Now, God did speak in the first 2 chapters in his conversation between him and Satan. But that was for our benefit, so that we know what is going on. But Job, of course, we know, hasn't any idea of what was said. And so as far as he's concerned, God has been silent and is silent. So maybe we all, when we get in these situations, begin to think in our minds and our soul that God really isn't listening to you, to us. Worse, maybe he doesn't care. Have you ever thought that? Rhetorical question, but I can say it's crossed my mind sometimes. Well, in verse 25, there's a sudden change in his expression. And this is 19, verse 25. It says, "I know that my Redeemer lives." Now Now it comes on, it seems like all of a sudden, and surprising in a sort of a way. It looks like many, and we know that it has to be the work of the Holy Spirit. Because in the midst of darkness, there always comes a moment of light to all of us. Now the word Redeemer is a special word, rather specific. And they use the word Goel. And it's a next of kin upon whom certain family rights and duties, including the avenging of a murdered kin, relative, the redemption of the person, a person, of the property of someone who is a relative. They may be in debt, helpless, in really terrible circumstances. It's someone who has a legal obligation to assure that everything is taken care of, secure. And we learn of this in the story of Ruth. Well, right here, though, in this chapter, in the book of Job, Job is not looking for a redeemer in the sense, as we would think now, of someone who forgives sins. There are many commentators saying that yes, he is. But that's really not the case with him right here. He is arguing his innocence. He wants someone to plead his case before God. So to get the context of this, then we go to chapter 18. And we read through 2 through 15 verses. Bildad, again, is speaking. And you can say that maybe this is a rather strong message, a strong sermon. Some could put it as really hellfire and brimstone. He's saying that Job belongs in the dwelling place of the wicked. Belongs in hell. So we pick up with verse 2. How long will you hunt for words? Consider, and then we will speak. Why are we counted as cattle? Why are we stupid in your sight? You who tear yourself in your anger, shall the earth be forsaken for you, or the rock be removed out of its place? Why should the whole center of order, why should the whole center of the universe be undone just for Job? The universe doesn't revolve around you. You're not really the full center of attention. And he goes on, he says, indeed, the light of the wicked is put out, and the flame of his fire does not shine. His strong steps are shortened, and his own schemes throw him down. This picture's an old man, and you see them as they're shuffling along, and they trip at times. Sometimes someone looks at me and they say, that's how you're walking. All right. His strong steps are shortened, and his own schemes throw him down. For he is cast into a net by his own feet, and he walks on its mesh. A trap seizes him by the heel. A snare lays hold of him. A rope is hidden for him in the ground. A trap for him in the path. Terrors frighten him on every side and chase him at the heels. His strength is famished, and calamity is ready for his stumbling. It consumes the parts of his skin. The firstborn of death consumes his limbs. Those are rather strong words. Life is nothing but filled with terror, and that things can happen at any moment, and disease can come and eat up one's flesh. And some, at a certain age, all things around them bring terror and scares them. He also has a play on words. Beginning in verse 14, he says, he is torn from the tent in which he trusted and is brought to the king of terrors. Now, he's taking one of the Canaanite gods, who's the king of terrors, who's going to grab him and cart him off. And that's what death is like. And then in his tent dwells that which is none of his. Sulfur is scattered over his habitation. Now they would use sulfur to put over and in someone's habitation where there was rotting flesh, the corpse. And this would be referring to his 10 children that were rotting in his tent. Now that's rather cruel. Cruel words to say, especially how it's delivered. You know, you approach somebody who's lost 1, 2, maybe more children, and you tell them, hey, look, you're getting old. You lost your kids. You're out there stumbling around. You're scared by everything on all your sides. You can die at any moment, you know. And nobody is going to succeed you. And what? Nobody is going to remember you after this. You're going to be long gone and forgotten. Well, chapter 18 concludes in verse 21. Surely such are the dwellings of the unrighteous, such is the place of him who knows not God. So he's telling Job that he is a man who doesn't know God. And that's really quite different from what we know, from what we read in the first 2 chapters. Well, these are his friends, and with friends like that, I don't know what kind of enemies you can have. Job responds, beginning in 19. In verse 2, he tells them, how long are you going to torment me and break me in pieces with words? Now face it, we've talked about this before. Words hurt. Maybe you've had them directed towards you by others. I've had them directed towards me. And when they're done by other believers, it hurts even worse. They're powerful. Words are very powerful. James will tell us that. Words, what do? They break up friendships. In grade school, going on into high school, one of my best friends, he's still a very good friend of mine in Indiana now. But we would visit his house. I liked it because they had a swimming pool. And I will say that my dad was a Depression-era raised man, but he was a staunch Democrat. Now our friend was a hardcore Republican. We're talking back in the 60s. Then one day we stopped going over. Well, I didn't stop seeing Mike, but we didn't go over to the house anymore. And I asked my mom, what the dickens happened? She told me sometime later, well, your dad and his dad, they got into a heavy argument, threw words at each other, and the friendship ended. That's how far it can go. And it affects a lot of people around you. Words break up marriages. Look, Jesus, what did he say? It's written in Matthew 15, verse 18. What comes out of the mouth proceeds from the heart. And that is what defiles a person. So Job says, how long are you going to torment me and break me in pieces with your words? These 10 times you have cast reproach upon me. Aren't you ashamed to wrong me? And even if it is true that I have erred, my error remains within myself. If I have erred, well, that's on me. I haven't done anything to you. So he hasn't done anything to hurt these people, to hurt his friends. And so it seems like, and this is what I have seen throughout my short life, that people do. They take things personally, even when it's not. So he's been rejected by his friends, and he's been rejected by his counselors. So in verse 19, Job cries, all my intimate friends abhor me, and those whom I loved have turned against me. All his friends, they're gone. They've left him. Back up to verse 6. Know then that God has put me in the wrong and closed his net about me. So he's been rejected by his friends, and he says it appears also that he's been rejected by God. Now, God has wronged him. Well, what if your husband or your wife was murdered? Your children were killed, maybe by a drunk driver, and the perpetrators aren't caught. Or if they are, they're not brought to justice, or the proper justice that they should have received. So you have a case now before the Lord, but he doesn't answer you. We mentioned last week about sometimes you feel that you pray and you pray and you pray, and what happens to your prayers? You think that they bounce off the walls, ricochet back up the ceiling, and God remains silent. You want answers, but he's not saying anything to you. Chapter 19, 13 through 15 are verses. He has put my brothers far from me, and those who knew me are wholly estranged from me. My relatives have failed me. My close friends have forgotten me. The guests in my house and my maidservants count me as a stranger. I have become a foreigner in their eyes. You know, there's usually that individual, that person that gets consumed so much by something, maybe even a tragedy, or worse or less. And that's all that they talk about, or they're consumed, and nobody around them now wants to be bothered by them anymore. People begin to avoid them. You see them, you walk across the street. They call, and you, oh, geez, it's so-and-so. Now I know what he's... You don't want to hear from them. So they avoid you if you are in that position. If you're the one that is aching, nobody wants to hear you. They're tired of listening to your belly aching. That's what they'll call it. Or someone will come up and say, hey, look, suck it up. You're not the only one that has these things happening to you. So you end up feeling a terrible, terrible state of rejection and injustice. And God doesn't say a word. So maybe you begin to think that God just doesn't care. There isn't any justice in the world. God cannot provide it. You might even reach the point of thinking that those religions that do think of having just one God are right, that, hey, it's karma. Whatever happens, happens. It's all the will of God. Well, Job cries out for vindication. In verse 23, we read, he says, oh, that my words were written, oh, that they were inscribed in a book. Now, his friends would have written something like on his epitaph in his tomb, whatever. Here lies Job, a sinner with secret sins. Paid his penalty at least, and God's justice has been vindicated. May he not rest in peace. Have you ever said or heard anybody say that about anyone? I hope he dies and not rest in peace. That's almost the same as being told that, you know, you should suffer like Ananias and Sapphira and end up in hell. But Job longs for words to be recorded, not just in a book, but permanently. It says that with an iron pen and lead they be engraved in the rock forever. So Job yearns for permanent vindication. It's something that's for at least 3 millennia. Think of this. His words are still being read. But Job makes a jump. Look at this. From yearning, crying for vindication, to a faith-filled hope. Goes from almost, you might think, from one extreme, boom, to another. He knows that he may die without seeing justice in this world. And that's not a good prospect for anyone. At least I would think. You know, you've been wronged badly, and the perpetrator has never been caught and brought to justice. Or he had good lawyers and they got him out on something else. And you'll die and would never have been vindicated. But Job turns right around and says, for I know that my Redeemer lives, and at the last he will stand upon the earth. That's quite a switch. quite a switch. Job seems to know something here. By faith, he knows he has a living Redeemer, someone who is going to see his case, that his rights are honored. His Goel, someone tied to him by covenant, someone that's going to stand for him when he's wronged. He has a kinsman redeemer. Then he says, after my skin has been destroyed, yet in my flesh I will see God, whom I shall see for myself, and my eyes shall behold, and not another, but my heart faints within. Now, some commentators say that Job isn't believing in the resurrection, but that his statement just says that justice is going to prevail. But no, others, and I'll lean towards that. Job is saying that he knows that his Redeemer will literally stand upon the earth, and in his own flesh, that is Job, he will see God. This book is so early in time in the Old Testament that there really isn't any explanation for this, how he knew. The only thing is that God has divinely given Job this knowledge, this thought. So in the middle of his trial, Job was given a sense, a moment of light. And this is really quite an extraordinary insight of faith. Now Job is going to go back into his laments and start questioning again. But in the end, he still holds fast to the integrity of Almighty God. As for us, we have a Goel, a Redeemer. We have a sovereign Redeemer. One who lives, and one who one day is going to vindicate every believer and declare them justified. How do you know? How can you be sure? Well, because there once was a real believer whom the monster God attacked with all vicious terrors. He was a blameless believer who experienced a terrible death, a death that he did not deserve, on whom the Redeemer God had vindicated publicly on the third day, when he raised him from the dead. Now, Charles Jennens, he placed the words from Job chapter 19, verses 25 and 26, right alongside the words, "Now is Christ risen from the dead." And this is in the aria of George Handel's Messiah. It is the bodily resurrection of Christ that gives us the assurance that the confidence Job had was not wishful make-believe, but it was a certain hope. The Father stood upon Christ's tomb and acted as his Redeemer to vindicate him by resurrection. This same God will stand on the grave of every believer, whether on the earth, in the ground, in the sea. On that day, he will act as our Redeemer. On that last day, those that are brought forth from the graves, we will all stand in our flesh, justified and vindicated before Him by grace. And with our own eyes, your own eyes, you're going to see God. This last hymn here, My Redeemer lives. You may remain seated. You have the words with you in the bulletin. And if you want to sing along, you can try. But listen to them.